Everyone knows the story of the Titanic, how the largest moving object ever fashioned by the hand of man hit an iceberg on its maiden voyage and sank in the middle of the North Atlantic. 1,500 lives were lost. The tragedy has been well documented in books and on film. No matter how often the story is told, it never fails to capture our imagination. Yet, it is a story that has left many questions unanswered. Now, for the first time, we take a fresh look at some of the mysteries surrounding the Titanic and reveal evidence that leads to a compelling and shocking hypothesis: that the ship that plummeted 2 miles to the bottom of the sea was not the Titanic, but its sister ship, the Olympic. The Titanic and the Olympic were built for the White Star Line by Belfast shipbuilders Harland and Wolff, whose chairman was Lord Pirrie. Harland and Wolff built ships almost exclusively for the White Star Line, which was acquired in 1903 by American financier J. Pierpont Morgan's International Mercantile Marine. This was part of a drive to create a monopoly on the lucrative North Atlantic passenger trade. Chairman of the White Star Line was J. Bruce Ismay. It was in fact Lord Pirrie who was responsible for bringing together Morgan's money and British engineering excellence. Over dinner at Pirrie's London residence in 1907, Lord Pirrie and White Star Line's Bruce Ismay conceived the idea of building 3 luxurious superliners. First the Olympic, then the Titanic, and finally the Britannic. The first of the new ships, Olympic and Titanic, were to be virtually identical. This represented the White Star Line's survival strategy in the highly competitive North Atlantic passenger market, while also ensuring a bright future for the Harland and Wolff shipyard. As well as holding a large financial stake in Harland and Wolff, Lord Pirrie was a shareholder in the White Star Line and the International Mercantile Marine. Almost all passenger liners on the North Atlantic route in the early part of the 20th century were immigrant ships. In poor condition, many were known as coffin ships, and their owners blatantly overloaded and overinsured their vessels. In fact, it was an industry noted at the time for fraud. On the 14th of June 1911, the Olympic made her maiden voyage, under the command of Captain Edward J. Smith, Commodore of the White Star Line. Then just a week later, still under the command of Edward Smith, the Olympic was involved in a stern collision with the tug O.L. Hallenbeck in New York, an accident that nearly caused the tug to sink. Barely 3 months later, on the 20th of September 1911, the Olympic, still under the command of Captain Smith, was involved in yet another collision, this time with the British warship HMS Hawke in the Brambles Channel in Southampton Water. It was a serious collision, which was to seal the fate of the Olympic. Pulled in by the suction from the Olympic's great propellers, the Hawke is irresistibly drawn towards the larger vessel, and the two ships collide. The Hawke's underwater ram and bows strike and penetrate the starboard side of the Olympic, causing a triangular hole several meters high, and an even larger hole below the waterline. Any accident involving a Royal Naval ship was investigated by the Admiralty, who, not surprisingly in this case, found that the Olympic was at fault, even though the evidence, including eyewitness accounts, suggested otherwise. As a consequence of this ruling, the White Star's insurers declined to pay out on the claim. The damage done to the Olympic was severe. Besides being holed both above and below the waterline, she sustained numerous other injuries, including steel frames buckled, Thousands of rivets popped, steel plating dislodged over 4 decks, and distortion to the starboard propeller and crankshaft. To make matters worse, the keel was bent, giving the ship a pronounced list to port. Interestingly enough, when 6 months later the ship which came to be known as the Titanic made her maiden voyage out of Southampton, second-class passenger Lawrence Beasley, a science teacher, noted that the ship seemed to have a slight but permanent list to port on the first part of the voyage, a fact noted by several other surviving passengers. The great hull was patched up in Southampton by riveting steel plates below the waterline and reinforcing with wooden beams above. This work took over 2 weeks, suggesting just how serious the damage was. In October 1911, with these temporary repair works in place, the Olympic then limped back to the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast for more permanent repairs to be done. In fact, some of those temporary repairs failed during the voyage to Belfast. By the way, remember that although this is a model of the Olympic, the two ships were virtually identical. It's this fact which made a conspiracy feasible, a conspiracy of monumental proportions.
The starboard propeller is going to have to be replaced, and the crankshaft is damaged. There's a crack between the arm and the shaft. But worse, the keel is bent. That's going to give her a permanent list to port, and there's no way we can correct that. We're going to have to cut the ship in half, insert a new frame, and then put it all back together again. The job is going to take months, and frankly, for what it's going to cost, I think it's simply a waste of time.
Can you not just patch her up until Titanic is ready?
Well, we could put in a bulkhead to strengthen her. But to be honest, sir, she will never pass another Board of Trade inspection.
In Belfast, the Titanic was nearing completion, but all work on her stopped so that every effort could be put into the repair of the Olympic. This work took 7 weeks instead of the 2 weeks originally planned, and involved replacing steel plates along fully 1/3 of the starboard side of the ship. Another indication that the damage was far worse than was originally thought. Now look at this. This is a film of the Olympic backing out of the dock in New York. You can see where she's been patched up on her starboard side. It's a huge area. And that's just the damage above the waterline. In order to get the Olympic back to sea and earning a profit as soon as possible, the starboard propeller, stamped with the Titanic's number 401 and not yet fitted to the Titanic, was fitted to the Olympic. This is a fact of some considerable significance, as we shall find out later. The Olympic's troubles, however, were only just beginning. After leaving New York Harbor on the 24th of February 1912, she ran over a sunken wreck off the Grand Banks and threw a propeller blade again on this starboard side. The loss of the propeller blade shock-loaded the engine and drive shaft and placed enormous stresses on the already weakened liner. She limped back to Southampton on only one engine, arriving there on the 28th of February. By the 2nd of March, she was once again in the Thompson dry dock in Belfast, having her propeller blade replaced. This should have taken only a few hours, but the Olympic was there, in Belfast, until the 7th of March. In Belfast, the Titanic and the Olympic were most often berthed side by side, and were regularly moved in and out of the Thompson dry dock, especially during repairs to the Olympic. On close examination of contemporary archive photographs, it is possible to see the minor differences in design that tell the two ships apart. On the forward part of sea deck, Olympic was built with 16 portholes. The Titanic with 14. Somewhat mysteriously, the Titanic has acquired 2 extra portholes between its launch and its maiden voyage. This clearly points to the possibility that the two ships were switched.